Hello, I'm Michael Hazel, and I'm with the Honorable Anita N. Martinez. Today is December 8th, 2010, and we are at Anita's home in Dallas, Texas. I will be interviewing Anita for archival purposes to capture for posterity her life in her own words. Today is a special day because Mrs. Martinez is celebrating her 85th birthday. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we know you were born on December 8th, 1925. Where were you born?
I was born in an area of town that's called Little Mexico, that is now the billion-dollar Central Business District.
Goodness. What was your name at birth?
My name was Anita Mongaraz Nanez.
Did you have any nicknames as a child?
My nickname, they call me Annie.
Where did that come from?
Because Anita is short Spanish for Ann or Anna, and so they call me Annie.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Jose Franco Nanez.
And what did he do for a living?
He started with a little grocery store on Caroline Street, and then he got sort of felt like he was too closed in, so my mother's brother took it over and held it for many years, and it was called F.T. Mongaraz. And then my father went into having a truck where he would park on what was called Orange Street. Now it's called Cedar Springs. And he would park right in front of a little restaurant that was there on the corner on McKinney and Orange Street. And people would come there when they wanted to be moved, and then he would also take people to the onion and cotton fields. And I would always ride in the front of the cab with him. And I was just like about 6 or 7, 8 years old at the time. And I would get up there and I would go through the rows with the rest of the people and pick onions. And then when the time came for cotton, I'd do the same thing. And when it would get real hot, he would say, "Go get under the cab of the truck, so that I could cool off." But at the end of the day, he would take everybody to a little grocery store in one of the little towns that had a sucker with the chocolate on top. And that's what I looked forward to all day long, while I was picking cotton or picking onions.
That was your reward.
Yeah, that was the reward. And it was just fun to do. And I liked being with people and hearing them tell stories and laugh and go through all the rows of, the harvest.
How long did your father do that?
Oh, he did it until he died.
Oh.
Yeah, he died at a very young age.
I see.
He was just 45 years old.
And what about your mother? What was her name?
And my mother's name was Anita Mongaraz. That was her maiden name, and then, Nanez.
Yeah. And was she a stay-at-home?
But her middle name was Trevino, Anita Trevino Mongaraz.
Did your mother grow up in Bandera? Was that
Oh,
right?
yes. My mother and my uncle and my Aunt Tilly. There was 3 in the family, the 2 girls and 1 boy. And then they received, my grandmother and grandfather received Spanish land grants. I saw my mother as a Renaissance woman, because when she couldn't go out and work and help, bring money to the table, she knew how to get around, my dad. So she started this, went to Moreno Beauty School and started this beauty shop in the front room of her house. She just moved everything out of there and just left the wicker couch there. She was very responsible for other girls opening beauty shops in the neighborhood, because she would say, you can be self-sufficient, you can bring money in, and it's fun. She would always have some sweet bread and a pot of coffee going, for the neighbors that would come in, and that's how she got around, bringing money to the table and helping. And then my father didn't feel like, a woman was supporting the household.
Yeah. Well, what brought your mother to Dallas?
Well, I think it was the just the commerce, and then my uncle on my father's side, he was a sheep herder and sheep shearer, and they lived in Abilene. And I think that he's the one, because he traveled all over Texas, shearing sheep. And I think that he's the one that made the effort and the push, to come to Dallas, because I think that he saw Dallas being commercial and thriving. And so my mother and her sister and brother all came over here to Dallas.
And what about your father? How did he get to Dallas?
Well, the same thing. That was his brother, Tio Albino. We call him Albino.
I see.
And so he came also.
Okay. And this was around what years would you say?
Wow, well.
Early 20th century?
Yeah, early. Yeah.
Great. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, there were 6 of us in the family. And just one boy, and he was a twin. And he was the second down the line. And then I was next to the youngest. Okay. And he volunteered to go into the service when he wouldn't have had to, because he was married and had 2 children. And he was the last of a family name, but he was very patriotic. And he loved being in the ROTC well, at the time it was called Crozier Tech High School. And then he quit school and got married and had 2 little children. And then when the war broke out, he told my mother that he was going to enlist, and my mother just begged him not to, because, there's just an honor code about having a boy in the family. And being the only one, we all just doted on him.
Yeah.
He ruled the roost, even though he was, second in line, And so my father, when my big sister thought, well, she's the oldest, she should be in command. And my brother thought, no, he was a male of the family. Yeah. So my father would let him put the boxing gloves on. Oh. And then, they'd go at it, boxing.
Right. And did your brother survive the war? Or?
My brother?
Yeah.
No, he wasn't. He was in the invasion of the June 6th invasion with General Patton, and he wasn't there 3 months. And they asked for a volunteer because there was a sniper, and he volunteered. One of the volunteers to go and check out. Before the troops went in, and he was killed. Dear. But that just really tore us up.
I bet.
Him being the only son. But he volunteered. That's what he wanted to do. He said, no, I have more to fight for. I have children.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your childhood and where you went to school.
Well, I went to Cumberland. That is now owned by the governor, that I also served, the governor. I was on his committee when he was governor of Texas, Bill Clements. And I went to school there because we were raised speaking both languages at home. What we couldn't think of fast enough in English, we said in Spanish, And I thought everybody spoke that way. So, when she asked a question, I would do both languages. And then she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, we don't speak like that here. You just speak English. So I went to the Wesley Community Center on Ackerd and Ashland, and they had art classes and sewing classes for kids, And my mother was a very ecumenical person, even though she was raised and really born Catholic. And so my mother, she was very, if you want to go and, learn something, go, So I was on the 2nd floor, and they were teaching us how to sew. And I looked out the window, and at the time, Harwood, Harry Hines used to be Turney Avenue until they made it, a 4-way highway. And I saw the nuns going across the courtyard at St. Anne's. Well, found out that's what it was. It was a school, St. Anne's, and then the Guadalupe Catholic Church, and then the nuns' convent. Across the way from the school, And so I saw them going back and forth, with their big, Sisters of Charity with their big hats, and they always had their hands like this, and they just looked so serene. And my mother had forbid us not to cross the street, because it was a major thoroughfare at the time. We thought, it became larger than that. But with my heart pounding, in my chest, I looked both ways and then darted across, the freeway. And I went up to the nuns, and she had her hands like this inside. So I said, what do y'all do here? And she said, I'm a school teacher, and we live in that convent. It was a 2-story white frame house. And so she said, where do you go to school? I said, to Cumberland. So she said, well, why don't you come to school here? And I said, well, I'll ask my mother. So I asked my mother. And she said, no. She said, to go to that school, you have to pay, and then you have to wear a uniform, and we haven't got money for that, So then, on the next day, I was up there on the second floor of the Wesley Community Center looking out, and I saw her going across the threshold, and so I ran across the freeway again. And so, I tugged her sleeve, and I said, I asked my mother, and she said that and she can't afford to send me here because you'll charge, to go to school, and then I have to wear a uniform. And she said, don't worry about that. We won't charge you, and we can make a uniform, we can get a uniform for you. So she took me to St. Anne's grade school, which is, where she taught. She taught 5th and 6th grade, 2 grades together. And so she took me to the attic, and there were big cardboard boxes. And we rummaged through, and found a uniform. And, when kids grew out their uniform, they gave them, and then they washed and pressed them and put them up, in their socks and their hose, really, the cotton hose that we wore. And so, we got a uniform, and, I went to my mother and said, the sister said that, I could be free, on a scholarship. And so she said, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, she was just very open, about doing something that was going to be to your benefit. And so I was like their little mascot. They called me the little flower.
What grade were you at this point?
At that point, I was in 4th grade.
4th grade.
I left 3rd grade at Cumberland and entered 4th grade at St. Anne's. And I carried their packages. And, when we walked to the downtown, and then the S.H. Crass 5 and Dime, right on the corner of Ackerd and Irving, was it? Yeah. And they'd buy their school supplies, and then I would carry them for them, and then I would take them as far as the kitchen. They had a big round oak table with big legs, and it always smelled of vegetable soup and ivory soap. And I was just so curious, I wanted to go see what their bedrooms looked like, but that's as far as I got. Oh. So, and so I thought at that time that I wanted to be a nun, I was just, because I loved, that they taught, they were educators, and then they always looked so happy and so serene, until they got me a job to go to work at the time, it was St. Paul's Hospital on Bryant Street.
And how old were you at that point?
Well, by this time I was in the 7th grade, so I was like about 12 years old.
Okay.
And I would ride my bicycle from where we lived on Ackerd at the time. We lived on Ackerd, and I would ride my bicycle to Bryant Street, and I'd go through, some kind of shady neighborhoods, and I would just sing and whistle real loud till I got, to the hospital. And I was like a little chambermaid, nurse's aide. And the first thing that I would do when I would get to the hospital is I would clean the bird cage. Sister Angela had a canary, a yellow canary, and that's the first thing I would do is clean the and then I go and mop the floors and change the sheets, and that's what I did.
Now, was this after school or on the weekends?
Oh, during the summertime.
Oh, during the summertime.
Yeah, during the summertime, during vacation. I always worked during vacations. I was always doing something, I was cleaning houses on Cliff, and I would take the streetcar and go across the Trinity because my older sister did it. That's 2 years older than I was. And so she said, you can do this too if you want to, they'll pay you 50 cents a day. And that was a lot of money, so she showed me the way to go, and then, she'd go to one house and I'd go to another and clean houses.
You said earlier that you thought about being a nun until you worked at the hospital.
And I thought I wanted to be a nun. I thought I wanted to be a nurse. And then I said, no, I've got to do something that's going to make me a living and help my mother, because by this time my father had died and my mother had had a stroke, and so she wore a brace in her leg. And out of the 6 of us in the family, I was the only one that graduated from high school. And this is why I have such an affinity for young people, is because their parents, Mexican American, Hispanic, Latino, whatever, they don't really, in my day and time, they really didn't push education because they needed them to, once they felt like they were speaking good English and they could make their way in the business world, that they needed to bring money to the table, which is what my sisters did. They worked at A. Harris at the time. That was a big deal to work at A. Harris, as a sales lady. And they thought that was prestige, they dressed nice, and they made money, and they brought money to the table. And but I said, Mother, I want to get you a brick house. By this time, my aunt had moved from where she lived on Ackerd Street, right down the street from us, and moved to University Park on Amherst and Preston Road. And there was a little white brick house on the corner that I wanted to get my mother. And I said, I need to graduate, get my high school diploma so that I can get a good job. But I had to really cry. And then my older sister, Tommy at the time, she went to bat for me. She said, Mother, let Anita, finish high school, because, she wants to save money to, so that she can buy you, a house close to your sister in University Park. But I always worked for my teachers. I never took a study hall period, and I got $6 a month, and it was called the NYA, the National Youth Administration Act. And so I would work for them and get $6 a month, and I never asked my mother for 1 penny for me to go to high school, and I would bring her the $6.
And what sorts of things did you do for the teachers? Or you said for the $6, what kind of work were you doing?
For the
NYA?
For the teachers,
yeah.
I would work, like Mr. Baker, just run errands, or clean boards, or organize his papers, or whatever he wanted me to do. I would do for my typing teacher, for my English teacher, whatever teacher needed me.
See. Do you have any special memories about Crozier Tech, going to school?
Crozier Tech, oh yes. I love going to school, and I took a non-college business commercial because I wanted to go to college, but I knew that I was doing good, to get permission to finish high school, and I knew that I needed to get good skills so that I could be a secretary, which is the time I decided that's what I wanted to do. And so I took a civil service exam when I graduated from high school, and got a good grade, and got in working in the finance department. And then and the building was and it's still there, the Santa Fe building on Commerce, almost across the street from the Adolphus. I still remember that big clock, right, and it's still there. And that's where I got one of my jobs. I worked, all over, downtown at Zales, and then at the Five and Dimes, H.H. Green, and Neiman Marcus, gift wrapping, and I was just all over the place. I was always finding, jobs. colonel in the ordnance department needed a secretary, so they said, yeah, and he wanted somebody that could speak Spanish. So I got that job and was Colonel Krim's secretary. And then he had a real good friend in New Mexico, and I would write, in Spanish for him, and then he would sign it like he had written. And it was a big joke that they had, between them.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful experience where I made a very good friend that also worked in that department. She worked in the for all the staff, but I was the secretary to Colonel Krim.
And had World War II started?
Oh
by
yes,
this point?
that was during the war, and I was able to get a pension for my mother because of my brother, having been killed, and so I went through all the papers and connections and everything, so that she would get a pension, even though he was married and had his wife and 2 children, but we were able to get a pension for her. It was a small pension, but anyway, it was something for her to get by on.
Do you have some memories of life during World War II? I know there was rationing and other things at the time.
Oh yes, yeah, a lot of memories, yeah. But my husband, I met him in high school.
And for the film, let's give your husband's name.
Oh yeah, Alfred Martinez. Most of our courtship was during the war, riding back and forth for about 4 years, because he decided to go into Civil Air Patrol because he wanted to go into the Air Force, so he thought he would get a jump on being able to be accepted, to go to training, in the Air Force. So he took a Civil Air Patrol, and then I think he was just like 17 or 18 at the time, and then went on to be a recruit as a cadet for the Air Force, and became a pilot. He became a second lieutenant, and then got his first lieutenant when the war ended, and he was going to reserves out at Grand Prairie Air Force Base, or reserve.
Did I hear once that you met on New Year's Eve, actually? Why don't you tell us about that?
But my sister, Tommy, she's 2 years older than I was. She was working at El Phoenix, and at the time she was a head check girl. They used to check hats, at the front door, as you went in back in the 40s. And so I was very excited because my mother, for the first time, had given me permission to go 3 doors down the street from us, the house next, 3 houses down, to go to a New Year's Eve party. And so I was looking forward to that. I was just about 15 or 16. And then my sister called. And I remember there was a little nook like this, for the phone. And it was in the bedroom. And the phone rang, and my mother went to answer it, and she said, "Oh, that's your sister Tommy." She says that my husband's big sister, which everybody just looked up to, Irene, says that there's going to be a lot of business because it's New Year's and she's going to need help for you to go and help her with checking hats and coats. And I said, "But you told me that I could go to this party down the street." And so she said, "Well, you can't, So she got in there, and we lived in a house that was sort of on an incline. By this time we had moved to Pearl Street, and we were the first Latino, Mexican American, Hispanic family that lived on Pearl Street, because it was mostly Jewish neighborhood. And so she brought the car down, from that little incline. It was a little green Chevrolet, and I sat in the front seat with her. So she dropped me off at the double doors, the brown double doors, And I looked at my sister and I just wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't say hello or anything. I was just standing right there, with my arms crossed. And then I saw this young man. He had on a navy blue suit, a white shirt, and a burgundy tie.
Uh-huh.
And then I turned to her and I said, "Who is that?" And she says, "That's Tink's little brother." And I said, "Little brother?" He was always he was already 6'2",
Uh-huh.
and he had gone, to help probably sick people, and he was coming from way down the aisle, and came right to where we were standing. And so she said, "Alfred, I want you to meet my little sister, Anita." And he just looked at me and didn't say anything, and then went off. And I turned to my sister and I went, and in a little while he comes back, and he had blown 2 figures of balloons, like schnitzel's, the boy and the girl, with the long balloon and the arms and the legs and the head. And so he said, "Do you like balloons?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he handed me the balloon, and that was the first words he ever said.
Oh, how sweet.
"Do you like balloons?" I kept those balloons forever in my little cot that I slept on. The 3 of us slept in the same room, right up against the wall until they just deflated.
Well, as you were courting, what qualities about him did you particularly admire or like?
Well, that he was very respectful, he was polite,
Mm-hmm.
and he was kind. And my mother and my grandmother just worshipped him because he was just so kind to them. He would always, come up the step. This time we lived on Pearl Street, and he'd always, acknowledge them, pat them on the back, and they just thought he was very special.
Great. Was your grandmother living with you at this time?
Yes, my grandmother was living. She was 93 years old when she died. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Right.
my mother was just 54 when she died.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, when and where were you married?
We were married at the Guadalupe Church on Harwood,
What was the date of your wedding?
January the 27th, 1946.
46.
Yeah, and my best friend married. We planned, getting married on the same day, and I married at 8:00 mass, and she married at 9:30 mass.
Oh, I see. And were the Martinez family also Catholic?
Oh yes.
Well, when you got married, did you stop working outside the home?
When my husband, he was from the old macho man, that the women didn't work. It was sort of like a stigma, like they weren't man enough, to support their family. And I had a really good job. I was working for that colonel. I was making good money, with the under the civil service, and I was making more money than him. And he worked, behind the steam table, wore khaki pants and big combat shoes, And I wanted to keep on working, and he said no. He said, my mother doesn't work outside the house, and my mother didn't either. I'd rather you wouldn't. So we didn't even have, it was right after the war, so there were no houses to be had. And so his uncle moved all the dining room furniture out of their dining room that was almost down the street from where Holy Trinity is on Gilbert. And that's where we just put a double bed there, and that's where we lived. And then we just put some nails on the wall and hung our clothes.
Oh dear. Well, I know pretty soon you started having children.
Well, in fact, it was like about 8 months, after we married, that I got pregnant, and then by this time the people that had lived in the house where we moved to, that his parents lived in on Gilbert, they had moved on up to Hawthorne. And so we had a hard time getting the people to move out, because the housing was so hard, to come by. And they finally moved out, but they left the house just really in disrepair. So I had, I was pregnant. I had a time cleaning the house. It was just a little frame house, and painting, and I got sick. I got urine poisoning and had to go into the hospital. And it just so happened that my best friend was also having a baby at the same time. And so she had her baby in the morning, and then they were going to try to force labor because it was, they said, it was getting too dangerous for me to continue with the pregnancy. So sure enough, I just prayed. I was always been very devoted to the Sacred Heart. And sure enough, at 3 o'clock, the doctors came and said, "You're going into labor. We won't have to do forced labor or do a cesarean or whatever." So he was born on a Sunday, my precious son,
Al.
Yeah,
Junior.
at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Tell us the name of your friend that you said also had.
Her name was Paula Hernandez, and they had it seemed like the family, that's what they went into is grocery stores. It was Hernandez grocery store.
Is she also the friend that was married the same day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, go on and tell me about your other children. You have 3 more?
Oh, and
children.
3 more. Yeah, so the doctors had said that I couldn't have any more children. And sure enough, 3 months later, I got pregnant. So the doctors were watching me like a hawk. And so, it was a 9-month delivery. And I had no problem.
Yeah. And the name of that child?
That was Steve. That's a doctor now in Houston. But it was the strangest thing when the nurse, brought him. I looked at the baby, and the lady that was next to me in that same room, she said, "What's the matter, Martinez?" And I said, "This is not my baby." And I hadn't looked at the bracelet. I had to put this little bracelet. She said, "Sure it is." And I said, and then I looked at the bracelet, and there was a no there. And I'm, well, Martinez doesn't have a no. And around the, and they came. I said, "This is not my baby," So the nurse looked at it, hurried out, look at the bracelet. And so they brought me my son Stephen, and then I felt, But isn't that something? How a mother's heart just tells her this is not it.
You could tell.
And then the other children, I had 4 children in 4 years. Yeah.
And your third child was a daughter?
Was the daughter, and she's the only girl. And I did, her name is Priscilla Ann. And I said, I did my job too well. I outsmarted myself. I always inculcated in my children to be proud of their Hispanic, Mexican, American, Latino heritage. And her 3rd year, she went to SMU. Her 3rd year, she went to the University of the Americas in Mexico City. No, the University of Mexico City. And she met a young man there. And then she came back and finished at SMU, graduated with honors from SMU. And then this young man came to ask for her hand in marriage and sat over there and he brought his father, his mother, a lawyer. They all sat in this room, and so asked for her hand in marriage. And my husband said, "I just ask you for one big favor. If and when she has children, if you will let her come and have her firstborn here, because they're so close to their mother that we want her to feel safe and taken care of. And he said, oh yes, that's no problem. So sure enough, 2 years later, when she got pregnant, she said, Luis, that's her husband's name, Luis Fernandez, said that, I could come into Dallas. And so my son, that was studying to be a doctor at the time, he went with me to Mexico City to bring her back and have her baby here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I said I outsmarted myself because now she's living in Mexico and part-time, but she did come and have her firstborn here. Then when she got pregnant the second time, 4 years later, her husband, and I will always be endeared to him because he said, if you want to go to Dallas and have the baby, it's okay with me. So she did. I mean, so we went back over there and escorted her back, and she had the baby here.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so they're so she's living over there in Mexico City, and her kids were born here, but they were raised in Mexico City.
And then your fourth child is?
And the fourth child, Rene, yeah, and he's the one that really loves the sports. He played sports for Saint Monica, and then for Jesuit, and he got 4 scholarships for colleges. And New Mexico was one of them. And I said, no, I don't want you to go for college football. We'll pay for your education. Because I had seen him being knocked out. And they put him in an ambulance, and I followed in the car, and I said, no, you don't need to do this.
Well, tell me a little about some of your activities when your children were in school. You were involved in some of the school
Oh, yeah,
PTAs.
very much so. Yeah. Well, everything, the only thing that I was always reading the paper, but there were some swimming classes that were going on at Stephen J. Hay on Gilbert, right at the end of 3 or 4 blocks from where we lived. And they said that the Red Cross was giving free swimming classes. So I said, oh, great, I want my kids to learn because I didn't know how to swim. And so I had one in the stroller and pushing one and one hugging on, to either side, and then one, going down Gilbert. And so, I went to the street where the Red Cross was in a picnic table where they were signing people up. And so I said, I'd like, to enroll my children in your swimming class, the Red Cross swimming classes. She said, well, how old are they? I said, well, 4, 3, 2, and 8 months. She said, oh no. She said, they're too little. She said, but do you swim? And I said, no, I don't know how to swim. She said, well, why don't you take the classes and we'll teach you, swimming, and then you can have your children in your class because you will be responsible for them. And then you can teach, for us. And I said, where do I sign up? And 72 hours later, I was not only a swimming instructor, I was a life-saving instructor. I went on to learn life-saving skills too, and taught for several years my children and other children in wherever the Red Cross was giving lessons. And Roy Wheeler was mostly that's on Harry Hines, that later was instrumental in pushing for them to get a rec center when I was on the city council.
Yeah.
They didn't have a rec center there, with just a swimming pool. And so anyway, that was a great experience for them, to learn. And then we came out in the front page of the Dallas Morning News, mother, with her children,
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah, swimming and life-saving Red Cross. And I had 2 on one side and then another one over here, and then the other one, baby sister, would go with me to look after the 8-month-old.
What about some of your other involvement in community affairs?
Well, that's where it started. With the teaching.
Swimming.
But even before that, when the war broke out, I wanted to be during the weekends. I wanted to work, as a volunteer nurse, and I went to sign up for it. They said no. She said, we've got all the volunteers we need for nurses aid. but what about dietitian aid? I said, yeah, so they signed me up for a dietitian aid, and I would go on Sundays and work behind the steam table.
Well, let's talk about some of your other civic activities.
Well, it started with me with the Red Cross.
Red Cross,
and giving classes to 4-year-olds, and they had to be 7 years old before they could enroll, but I had them in my class because I was a mother, And but then from there, I realized how important it was to give back to your community. So I said when the kids all started, and I was a Cub Scout and Bluebirds and Boy Scouts, mother cafeteria, and always volunteer and seeing where my children were, and helping. When I was able to have more time, then I decided that what could I do to help my husband, with this business. So that was to become involved with the Dallas Women's Restaurant Auxiliary. So I volunteered for that, and I never did seek office for anything. When I was a leader in the cafeteria or the Cubs or the Bluebirds or they always sought me, and I guess they saw, well, she gets things done, and makes things happen. So I became very active with the Dallas Ladies Auxiliary, Restaurant Auxiliary, and then they themselves said, well, why don't you become second vice president? I said, okay, so I did, and then, well, why don't you become president? And then during my tenure as president of the Dallas Ladies Restaurant Auxiliary, we started the Taste of Dallas because we were very successful at doing a tasting bee, but we had outgrown it.
Tell me what that was.
The tasting bee was that we would bring different dishes that the ladies in the auxiliary would cook, and then we would sell them tickets to come, to the tasting bee, and then we would give the money to one of my favorite charities or whatever we voted on, but we mostly did charities to West Dallas because I always saw that as a very underserved and very poor area. And so we would give money to the Boys Club and to the girls, to Father Albert that I had done volunteer work with. We outgrew the tasting bee. And so we said, well, we've got to do something bigger so that we can bring more money in, to help the community and help the children. So the Houston had a tasting bee in Houston. And so we went over there to see how they did it. And so they said, well, get the restaurants involved. And they said, now for the first 2 years, you're not going to make any money, but it'll be a start. So we came, we planned it, and we took ideas from them and put the first tasting bee here in Dallas. And we got the men involved, and we were at the Fairmont displaying, all the food. And I mean, we made money. We never lost money. We made money, because the men really, put their shoulder to the wheel and helped, and then they were advertising their business. And then Vivian Casaberry, that worked with the Dallas Times Herald at the time, she was a great help. I called the PR man in Austin, the Dallas Restaurant Association, and not the Dallas, but just the whole Texas Restaurant Association. And I said, how can we get publicity for what we're doing so that we can get more people involved? And he said, do you know, it was Buckshot. That was his name, Buckshot. Buckshot, his father had been, president of the Texas and ran. He was an administrator, and then he became, And I said, and I called, and he said, well, talk to the publicity man here. I'll pass you the phone to him. He's right here. And I talked to him, and he said, "Do you know Vivian Castleberry?" On the phone, you know. And I said, "No." I said, "But I've read her articles, and I think she's great." He said, "Well, if you can get her to do a story on it, you'll have it made." So I called Vivian, and I said, "Why don't you meet me for lunch at the restaurant downtown?" And so she said, "I'll see you there." You know, so we made a date, met there for lunch, and she said, "Well, you know what you've described, you know, the programs that you put together is goals for Dallas." This was before I became president, when I was a second vice president. And so she said, "So, you know, we'll do." So she did that, did all the thing, and then did the layout in West Dallas with sweet bread and, you know, little children and me, you know, and it made the front page of the Dallas Times Herald.
Wonderful.
Because, you know, she was ahead of the,
Yeah.
and so then we were off and running.
Talk a little about how you came to be elected to the city council.
That's where we were going, you know, with the office always seeking me.
Yeah.
I never did go after I didn't even know about the city council. And I had a call late one night from this lady that said, "I have read and I have heard a lot about you." And she said, "I want you to please run for the Dallas City Council." And she said, "We're having some issues with a lawyer that's put his head in the ring to run for the Dallas City Council, and we need somebody like you to represent us." And so she said, I went to Bill Alexander, that at the time was an assistant attorney. She asked him, "Who can we get, you know, in the Hispanic community to run for the city council?" And he said, "Do you know Anita Martinez?" And she said, "Well, no, I've heard about her, I've read about her, but, you know, I don't know her." He said, "If you can get her to run, she'll win." I didn't even know Bill Alexander. And so she called me, you know, about 10 o'clock one night, and my husband came home a little bit later. And I said, "Guess what? This lady just called me, and she wants me to run for the city council." And he said, "Are you nuts? Haven't you got enough to do?" I had this table covered with work that I was doing with the restaurant auxiliary, the kitchen table covered with the work that I was doing with the Ursulines and with Jesuit, and you know, then you know, the Dallas Restaurant, you know, Association. I said, "But that's just it. From up there, I can really look down and see where I can get more volunteers to help and get more of a thrust on you know, improving our community."
What was this woman's name, by the way?
Her name was, they called her Candy Estrada. So, you know, we knew the name, but I didn't know her, and she didn't know me. But she, you know, I said, "I think I can do this." I said, "Because this is really what I'm doing here, you know, and from up there I can do more." And so he gave me his blessing, even thinking that I would make it to first base. But I tell you what helped me was I had been on the board of the YWCA on Jackson Street, and Connie Staccatos Condos was the president at the time. Connie Staccatos Condos, I don't know whether you ever heard of her, but she was a force in this city. And so she was on the Citizens Charter Association panel. She was the only woman on that panel, and you know, I had served on her board. And so when the CCA was looking over people to endorse, they were meeting in a smoke-filled drawing room, all men. She was the only lady. And she said they just went on and on about the candidates. And she said, I have put my candidate in as Anita N. Martinez to run under the CCA Charter Association." And she said, "And I'm going to say it again, And so they just looked at her and like, you know, who knows this woman, you know, how can she win, you know? So she said, I'll guarantee you that if you get her to run under the CCA banner, that she will win. So with a lot of doubting, they went ahead because she was so respected and so well known and had won every award, Lynn's Award, every award that you can think of in this city, and very effective. So they went ahead and endorsed me, never thinking that I would make it to first base, because I was the only candidate that had the only other woman that was running in my spot, which was 9th, and then the only other Mexican American that was running in that spot, and then a man that was very strongly supported by the American Party and myself. And they said Ron Calhoun came and interviewed me. I was sitting on that couch, and he was interviewing me, and they didn't think I had a chance. He said, you know, I think this is going to get into a runoff with you and Bartos, the lady that was running, you know, on the same ticket. And I said, well, I'm going to do my best. And I said, I'm a tough campaigner. And I mean, I didn't leave a stone unturned. I mean, every man's club for breakfast, went to the Old Mill Cafe in Fair Park. Yeah. Wherever the salesmanship club, anywhere where the women's clubs that I had been, you know, active with, the auxiliary, garden clubs, you know, they had something in their home for me. I never, you know, turned anybody down. And so when the vote came in, we were at the Statler, the Hilton at the time, on Main Street,
Yeah.
on
Commerce.
and Harwood.
Mhm.
Almost, we just, when we had our meetings there, we would just walk down from Old City Hall. And the returns were coming in, and Ron Calhoun, the political staff writer for the Dallas Times-Herald, came up to me and he said, do you realize what's happening in your race? And I said, no. He said, and these were his exact words, is short of a miracle. That I had won it without getting into a runoff with 4 people, you know, running, you know, against me. But I had the Cub Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Jesuits, the Ursulines, the ladies that I had worked with in the garden club. I mean, they all just banded together. Kids that I had gone to grade school with were calling me on the phone. I remember John Zapata Gonzalez, one of the first ones. He said, what can I do to help? I said, I need a lot of signs put up, you know, and build flyers, you know, send out. So everybody, they said, and then my nephews and nieces, they said that my materials were the first ones to fly out the place where the CCA had them, and it got to the point where the mayor, Eric Johnson, when they wanted something distributed, they said, hand it over to Anita, her friends and relatives.
I think we should explain that place 9 was an at-large seat, was it not? So you represented the entire city.
But when I served the 4 years, everything was at large.
Oh, I see.
Everything was at large.
Yeah.
But I ran it not in a certain district, but when you were voted on, district or whatever, everybody was voted citywide.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you didn't have to represent a specific district. You
Nobody
represented
did.
the entire.
Oh yeah. Well, no, you're right. Yeah. The places 9, 10, and 11 were at large.
Yeah.
The others represented a district, but they still
Were
had
elected.
to get vote. They couldn't. It's easy to run now because you can concentrate on one area.
Yeah.
Then you had to just run citywide.
Citywide.
Yeah. I had one of my nephews that was getting up on a water tower and putting my sign up.
Now, you
But-
were, of course, the first Mexican American to be elected to the Dallas City
Yeah.
Council.
The first Mexican American to be elected to the Dallas City Council, and the first Mexican American woman in the United States.
Oh, in the United States. Okay. Now, on that particular city council, were you also the only woman on that
Yes,
council? Yeah.
but Sybil Hamilton had
There had been once before, but
well, yeah. In fact, she's the one that I replaced. Yeah, and so she called me the day before the election, and she said, "Well, Anita, how do you feel?" I said, "I feel like I've been run over by a steamroller." And she said, "Well," she said, "now all you can do just you've done your best. Now just go to the beauty shop, get your hair done." And I said, "Who's got time to go to the beauty shop?"
Yeah.
You know. So I was getting in the shower, and before I did that, I got down on my knees, and I said, "Sacred Heart, for some reason you want me to do this." But I said, "I don't want to get into a runoff. If I do," I said, "that's it. I'm not going to do it." So you know what happened? I had the radio going, and they said there was lines downtown. People getting their late driver's
voter
license.
registration,
Yeah. So I said, "That's the way he's answering me." So I put on a wig. And I went downtown. I called my friend that I had met at the 8th Service Command that lived on Merrill Road, just down the street from here. And I said, "I need to go hand out some cards, because the vote's going to be tomorrow." And the radio just said there's a line long, waiting for people to get their driver's license. So I said, "I need you." So she said, "I'll be right there." So she came over. I called my sister. She had a jewelry store right in the corner of Irving and Pacific, across from the Republic Bank building. And so I called her and I said, "We're coming over and I need you to help me distribute these." So I went one street and the others went on the other, I went Elm and Main and Commerce, and we went all the way up to City Hall. So I would hand us the votes tomorrow. "I'm Anita Martinez. Here's my card and my qualifications. Would you please vote for me?" And some of them would say, "Yeah, I will." Or some would just pitch it. And I would turn around and then I'd go back and pick it up. But they heard me because they said, well, like Ron Calhoun, the political staff writer, said, "It's just short of a miracle."
That's great. For the record, we'll mention this was 1969.
1969.
And you were reelected
April.
2 years later.
Yeah.
In 1971. Why don't you tell us about some of your special interests while you were on the council? Some of the things you were most proud of.
Okay, well,
helping to do,
I was so involved in the community
Yeah.
that I knew that West Dallas was a very underserved. I mean, they still had outdoor toilets, no street lights, no curbed and gutters, and I knew that if I wanted my city, if I wanted my kids to grow in a strong community, that we had to help the weakest link get strong, and that was West Dallas, from my perspective. So I concentrated in that area. And I was sworn into office on Cinco de Mayo in the steps of City Hall. And then that night, I invited my council members to go to Pike Park, because they were going to have the Cinco de Mayo festivities. And so Eric Johnson and all my councilmen went. And when I got up to, give rah-rah, and thank the people, for voting and get involved, and help us get things done, for your community. But we need your muscle to do it. We can't do it by ourselves. And then, it started getting dark, and I couldn't hardly see my hand in front of me. And so the next day, I went to the Park and Rec department and talked to L.B. Houston. I said, Mr. Houston, I went to Pike Park to give my talk, and all the mayor and my council members were there. And I said, I was just really scandalized by the disrepair that park is in, because I had gone to play there when I was a little girl. I couldn't believe the swings were off there, the chains, the faucets didn't work, the bathrooms, the doors were off, and it was awful. So he said, "Oh well, Councilwoman, that is very valuable property, and that is going to be turned into business property." And I said, "Not in my lifetime." I said, "And I will work to get improvements to their park, and I know that my councilman will endorse what I'm saying 100%. I said, "I want that. I want lights," and sure enough, a year later, when we went, it was just they had put 17 mercury vapor lights in the park, and when the dust started, sun going down, I mean, it was just like daylight. Those lights came on. Repaired even the boxing ring downstairs where they trained boxing, and the water fountains and the bathrooms flushed, and it was just wonderful what can happen with people working together. Yeah. And then people seeing things that need to be done and want to help the community, like my council members.
I think you mentioned at one point the street paving.
Oh yeah.
Was that that was a project, wasn't it?
Oh yes, that in fact, I went and I took the city managers, his assistant city manager, the chief of police to West Dallas to give a pitch to the people. I said, "I need help. Y'all have to come. They have to see your stature and your responsibility that you're going to help this community." And they did. They came, they started hacking me. One man in particular, "Oh, you all come over here off your ivory tower, and they come and give your talks and speeches, and then you go back and you forget about us." Mm-hmm. I said, "No, but we can't do it. We need you to help us get it done." Yeah. And I remember that young man, Pete Martinez, but he was just so frustrated. And then I put him in touch with a young man, the one that had called the first call that we had gone to grade school together, John Zapata Gonzalez. And I put them together, and I said, "Now, we're going to work with the community, and I want you all to work with me, and we're going to have a meeting with the community and say 10 things that you want done, and let's work together to get it done." Yeah. So they wanted the street paves, they wanted a clinic, they wanted a rec center, they wanted street lights. Okay, but I said, when I pitch for that, y'all are going to have to cross the Trinity and come to City Hall. And the the members of the city council were surprised to see so many poor, humble people coming to City Hall. A lot of them had never even crossed the Trinity River Bridge. Mm-hmm. And they came just very humble, and but when they saw that we had turned a little old dilapidated little frame into a clinic, and they saw the street lights going on, then they believed that we could get things done if they got involved. They formed little groups, and we were all working together.
We've already mentioned that you were reelected in 1971.
Yeah.
Did you have any hesitation about a second term?
No, not at all,
No.
because I knew that there was still a lot of
to do.
things that I needed to get done, and that if I wasn't going to be there to advocate for it, that it would just kind of, and so one of the things that I really thought that they needed was a recreation center in that area, and then I said, we need to get this on the bond program, and I talked to the park representative, Mr. L.B. Houston, and I said, we need a rec center there. There's nothing. And so when we had a meeting of the print, the newspaper, the radio, and the TV media, all the reporters were there because each department head was justifying what they were asking to go on the bond program. And Mr. Houston was sitting right in back of me. And when he had this little podium stick, the silver with the light, and so he was pointing, what was happening, and then that he needed more money for this particular. And so I turned to him and I said, Mr. Houston, you told me that there was no money left on the bond program in your department, and here you're saying that you need something that's already there, that it needs repair, and you said that you want money for that. I said no. I said I will not work for, and I took the podium, and I pointed. I said, this is what I'm talking about. Look at this. There's nothing there. And I said no. And my councilmen were astounded because I never argued, in public. I always had my battles behind in the conference rooms and made my point. And so I got up and I said, I won't work for the bond program. I walked out. And you know what? We had our meetings on Monday. The following Monday when we had our meeting, Fred Zeter he was a councilman, he made the motion that we approve a rec center that Councilwoman Martinez had advocated for, and if she hadn't pulled on our coattails, it wouldn't have happened. And if it does pass the bond program, we're going to name it the Anita and Martinez Rec Center in West Dallas.
Great.
And that was one of the first things that got on the bond, because they knew that I would be tugging at their coattails.
That's wonderful.
You know how things go, a couple of years or 3 or 4 years before, even you have the money, in the bond, you still have to, issue the bonds to get it done. So that was the first thing that was built on that particular bond program.
Wonderful.
And it was, at the time, it was one of the smallest of the 48 at the time, with 14,000 square feet. But hey, we had a space and we had a place there.
That's great.
And we were able to prove years later that there was the highest youth center in the city of Dallas by their own records. So then I went for an expansion of the rec center. And they said, well, there's no money, But we got it. We got it done. But we didn't get all the money that we done. But then there again, it went from 14,000 square feet to 38,000 square feet. The only rec center with a second floor, and we needed a second floor because I wanted to have the ballet folklorico, and I wanted a spring-loaded dance floor. And I had gone to a town in New London, Connecticut, that had what I was looking for, that somebody in the park department had told me. So I had gone with a friend to see how they had done that. And I said, that's what we need. So we came back and presented plans to the architect that was going to build, and that we got a spring-loaded dance floor. But then we couldn't use it full-time because they said, because it's a city-owned facility, they've got to leave it for other groups. And so we couldn't have regular hours.
Talk about the Ballet Folklorico and how that all came about.
Well, for this reason, that I saw the children holding themselves back, just very humble, and just like lack of confidence, and just a feeling that they're not good enough.
Yeah.
And I said, I would like for this rec center to be like a United Nations, because we had Mexican Americans, we had Black Americans, we had Indian Americans, we had Asian, we had poor whites, all poor people, living in this area. And this could be a great example of united.
Yeah.
And but our Black Americans would take over the basketball court, because they're so good at it,
Mm-hmm.
And our little Mexican Americans would just come back and just watch the ball go back and forth. I said, I've got to do something that they can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about when I was a little girl, how this lady that lived in the neighborhood, Rosita, everybody was extended family. Everybody was either your aunt or your grandmother, and that she took us on. There was 8 of us. Took under her wing, and taught us dance and theater, and we would put on shows in the red clay dirt, and we would sweep, just water down, sweep, and then hang a curtain and perform for the neighborhood, And her mother worked at Nardis Sportswear, so she would make our dresses out of hot pink crepe paper. And I remembered how that made me feel so confident, that people would actually applaud us, Or we would put shows on the front porch, and people would lean over the cyclone fence and watch us for a little while and clap, and then move on, to their jobs. But so I remembered how that music and how that feeling of joy that I saw in people's faces and give back to us, that I said, I've got to do something that they can relate to, even if they just hear the music. So that's how it started.
Anita, Martinez Ballet Folklorico will celebrate its 36th
Yeah.
anniversary soon. Why do you think it's lasted so long?
Well, I think because of the parents, have gotten involved, and then the city has gotten behind us. I mean, not to the extent that they give to medical, to the children, which is I support 100%, but they don't see that the holding children back and then not feeling good enough about who they are, that it'll come back to bite us. And we need to nurture that soul, and we need to nurture that self-worth and confidence in children. And if you don't do that by the time they're 8 or 9 or 10 years old, then you've lost them. And so I wanted to give that to children, and to our future in being confident about, and that's why we started. It has grown, but it hasn't grown to the extent that I envision in, say, 10 years from now, because I feel that at that time, maybe we will get the Hispanic, Latinos, Mexican American, whatever, we all speak one language, but we're very diverse in our outlook and what we support, that they will see the importance of what the arts do to nurture the soul and the mind and the body of a child growing up.
So you're hopeful that the folklorico will grow?
Oh yeah, I have no doubt, because we are educating children now, and they are the future.
Right.
And we have young people that have graduated from our program. In fact, just last month, we had Vincent Tenorio that started with us when he was 12 years old, and his little sister was 8 years old. And we gave him a scholarship because he gave us a little sample of what he had been taught, in his Sunday school class.
Yeah.
And so we knew that he could catch on to because they're very intricate steps in folklorico. You use your math, and so we offered him a scholarship. And then his little sister, she didn't qualify, but then she started crying. I said, okay, well, I will pay for her scholarship. But I said, if you're going to take for 1 year, and if you don't do well in 1 year, well, then, you lose your scholarship. She became one of our best dancers. He became one of our lead dancers, and he just came to have lunch with us, and we were showing him the studio, and he said, I remember when I came, and he said, you know what this program, and we got him on tape, he said, you know what this program did for me? It gave me the confidence to speak before people. And he got a full scholarship to St. Mark's. He got a full scholarship to Jesuit, but he chose St. Mark's. When he graduated from St. Mark's, he got a full scholarship to Pomona College in California, gave him a grant to go to Africa and do environmental studies. And then he went back to Pomona College to finish there, but he said, I want to join your board. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, I think that as the Latino population, and, not too distant future, they're going to be 50% of the majority community.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we're all diverse, but we know that the future is in the children and them getting along and working with one another. And I have no doubt that the Latino community will support the arts more so than they do now.
What do you feel is the most valuable lesson you've learned in your life?
I think the most valuable lesson is having given my 4 children a good grounding so that they can go out and multiply what they've been taught. And I cherish every minute, even though it was a lot of times it was feeling like you wanted to pull your hair out, but that I spent with them, because they're tremendous young people for themselves and for their community. And I think, if you lay a good solid foundation there, then you can multiply your efforts to help other people.
La esperanza de mi amor te la llevas por fin. Sin ti es inútil vivir, como inútil será el quererte olvidar. Sin ti no podré vivir.
just like birds of a feather. I won't tell no lie. All of the people around us, they say, can they be that close? Just let me state